Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another Friday morning apocalypse with Popoff and Pardo. Martin Popoff joining us here on the Zoom line. Good morning, Martin. How are you today?
Yes, morning, Pete. Doing fine. Thanks very much.
So we've got another interesting twist of a show for you here today. Martin and I often sit and just kind of contemplate what other things we can do that are not just ranking albums. So I think Martin actually came up with this idea. How about those maybe not so stellar debut albums from bands, where we're actually going to call this worst debuts from bands who got better really quick. All right. And these are notable bands. So we'll preface this by saying that, these albums aren't necessarily terrible, but considering how great these bands got and how great their albums got very soon after these, these albums may be considered by some kind of mediocre, kind of weak. Some folks may love these albums, and that's totally cool. There's plenty to like on a lot of them, but these bands, in our minds anyway, definitely got really a lot better shortly after these debut albums. So we've each picked 5. We had a whole list of ones that we were working on, and we decided to whittle it down to 5. If people really dig this format, we may do this again, because I think there's other bands that we did not get to here. So I'm going to have Martin, and we're going to go in the order of kind of what less sucky. I don't know. It's so our number 5s are going to be the ones that are the more successful out of these, and our number 1 picks obviously are going to be the worst representations of this kind of topic. So I'll have Martin kick us off with his number 5.
Yes, and to go on record, my number 1 and my number 2 are really terrible.
You know what? And I will pretty much say the same. Again, there's going to be people out there who love these, and that's totally cool. I will go on record saying the first 2 on my list I almost never listened to, and we'll get to them. So
all right. Okay, so my number 5 is a little band you might know of as Aerosmith. You've heard of these guys, I'm sure. So this record, so I've got it in my number 5 position, which means, I'm not hating it totally, but I've always had it in for this album. I find it to be a really depressing album, badly recorded, dated even for 1973. It's not that heavy. I really do not like One Way Street. I was never a Dream On fan. Our band actually played Moving Out in the 80s, believe it or not. It's got Walking the Dog on it, a Rufus Thomas cover on here. On my copy, it's Walking the Dig. Remember that typo that they had on it, right? And on the back, it's got the little hype essay like on the first Ted Nugent album. But yeah, never really liked this record very much. It's produced by Adrian Barber, who I don't know much about, but apparently he's done like Buffalo Springfield, Rascals, Velvet Underground, Allman Brothers, Cream. So, kind of an old bunch of albums that he's done. And this has a really kind of cardboardy sound to it. And the other thing about this, which is kind of funny, is that Steven sings in that sort of lower register that is analogous to Black Sabbath, Ozzy on the very first Sabbath album, and kind of never again, right? At least, with that consistency. So Steven, he's got this odd low voice on it. And I always wondered if it was a little bit like those stories you hear about Roger Daltrey singing like an old blues guy when he first came out, right? On those early Who albums. So just depresses the heck out of me, this record. I don't think it's very good. And the reason I picked it also is because of the high relief of the concept of this show. I think they got really better fast. This is a great album. The album cover of this is so depressing looking that it really doesn't match the music and clothes. The music is really good on this, but the album cover, it looks like an indie release. And it looks really kind of sad and dark and depressing. And I think this one with an album cover like Rock in a Hard Place or Rocks or something like that, you'd have a whole different complexion on it. But Jack Douglas comes in and totally changes everything around. All the songs are great on it. The mellow songs, 2 of my favorite mellow songs by them, Spaced and Seasons of Wither. So, I think it's a huge leap up to Get Your Wings from this debut. Never liked this record very much. There you go. my number 5.
Yeah, and I think that the kind of key to this whole conversation is that huge leap, right, from the first album to the second, and massive leap there. And I would argue, and maybe 30 years ago I might not have said it, but I would argue that their second album is one of the unsung sophomore releases in like hard rock history. It just gets better with age. It's really strong. That's a great choice. Yeah, I'm not huge onto the debut either. I mean, it's got some decent songs on it, but it just they really weren't clicking yet, and I think that's probably the case with most of these. So my number 5 from 1974. Again, I don't dislike this album. I just think it's one of their weaker ones, and it's for me, this band just got so much better by leaps and bounds with their second album. Rock-a-Rolla by Judas Priest. Forgive the crappy re-release. Monster Man, whatever, I don't know, whatever you want to call this guy, right? So we're missing the little soda bottle covers, right? But this is kind of solid but unspectacular, riffy, heavy blues rock. That's basically what this album is. You got Roger Bain producing this album, who of course worked with Black Sabbath, right, on their first couple records, and but not a big beefy production, kind of like he gave them. I always found the production kind of thin on this album. Halford sounds in fine form. I mean, you get what Rob Halford is all about right off the bat on this album, I think. It's got some decent songs. One for the Road I kind of like. Rock-a-Rolla is kind of fun, upbeat, almost kind of glammy in a weird way, right? You got the kind of like Winter Deep Freeze, Winter Retreat, Cheater kind of like combo tracks there, which I think have some moments. There's some big kind of rumbling riffs on this album that kind of sound like early Budgie, right? There's little bits of doom on here, which not really Priest thing, but they kind of, I mean, obviously Sabbath was so big at the time, so not surprising. Never Satisfied has its moments. Run of the Mill has its moments. Dying to Meet You has its moments. There's some vocals from Halford that border on brilliant, that really show where he would go on the next album, which Sad Wings of Destiny is that follow-up that just really, saw them just increase their output big time. But I think that this album, to me, I hear lots of bits and pieces of things I like on this album. I don't find that a lot of the songs are very cohesive. And I think that's my problem. It's like, I'll hear like in, a song or two, I'm like, oh, that riff is really cool. Then they go into this little atmospheric thing that kind of goes nowhere, meanders a little bit. Halford sounds great. There's not a ton of like great guitar solos like we would hear coming up on future albums. There's nothing on here that's really anthemic like a lot of the stuff that we would hear on, Sin After Sin, Sad Wings, and all those other great albums to come. But I think there's enough here to enjoy. I just don't think the total package is quite here yet. And I know there's a lot of fans of this album that they love this. And, as far as like, heavy metal debuts go, it's got its moments. But I think it pales in comparison to what came after.
Yeah, cool. My Rock-a-Rolla story, I mean, I just listening to you talk about it, is just the fondest memory is, so got Sad Wings of Destiny, 13 years old, it's 1976, and I'm like going through one of these little fanzine things once at some point, and I noticed this line listing for Judas Priest Rock-a-Rolla, and just freaked out, right? It was a mail order thing, right? And so I ordered that record, and I've never in my life like anticipated a package arriving in the mail so much as waiting for that copy of Rock-a-Rolla. It was $7.99. It showed up. Import copy of Rock-a-Rolla just blew my mind, with the Coke bottle top on it and stuff, the cover. It's just like waiting for that package to arrive was just amazing. And I'm more of like a 7 out of 10 on that album. I like it quite a bit. And I think the production's pretty good on it too, for a baby band debut. So yeah, it's a pretty cool album. But yeah, it sounds like a demo version of Sad Wings in a way.
Right. Yeah. I don't hate it by any means. And I was listening to it last night, the first time in a little bit that I've heard it. And I was like, yeah, some of the stuff is good. I just don't think it's fully realized yet. And I think some of the songs are just lacking cohesion, but there's some elements on it that are pretty spectacular, I think.
Yeah.
So it's kind of spotty for me, but I totally get why some people would rank it pretty high. I totally get that.
And it's cool. There are 3 or 4 things on it that seem like weakerly written songs that showed up on Sad Wings in a way.
Yeah.
Right? right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
The riffs and stuff. So, all right. So my number 4, a little complicated, because I wanted to show a parallel band as well. But my number 4 is AC/DC with High Voltage. So this is the Australian High Voltage, right? And then they went to TNT. There's the Australian TNT. And then they went to the Australian Dirty Deeds. And then our debut was the North American High Voltage, which is mostly TNT. But the original High Voltage is AC/DC in 1975. It's a little before they found their sound. There are elements of the sound on here with like She's Got Balls, Stick Around a little bit, Soul Stripper a little bit. But you know, Love Song is this weird kind of proggy ballad that they did. They never did anything like that ever again. Baby Please Don't Go. I don't need to hear another cover of that ever by anybody. It's like our No Morning Dew sign above the door, right? You know, Little Lovers, Mellow, Stick, you know, all of these are all very laid back versions of the AC/DC sound, if they're that at all, like Little Lover, Stick Around, Soul Stripper, You Ain't Got a Hold of Me. The one good thing about it is well recorded. It's a Vanda and Young. It's on Albert, right? So by the time, like I say, we get to this debut, this is actually quite a good album. And it's, like I say, it's mostly TNT. It's a little bit of a compilation. But I wanted to just show as show and tell. I almost went with this band that is so remarkably similar, the Angels from Angel City, right? So this is their debut, and it's the same kind of thing. It's like a little bit glammy and dated and old, and it's a little bit mid 70s, even though I think we're into 77 with this, or 76. But so the Angels went from that to the Australian Face to Face, all Vanda and Young again, and or more or less, and Albert, right? And then they went to No Exit, and then we got as a debut in North America, the North American Face to Face, which is really great. It's one of the classic albums of all time. It's heavy, it's very AC/DC-ish. It's better than any Crocus album, but it's like that kind of music, right? It's like a cross between Crocus, AC/DC, Heaven. I don't know who else would you throw in there. So it's funny that there's these 4 all line up, and these 4 all line up. They're very similar stories, but yeah. So AC/DC, if you listen to that original High Voltage, it's quite mellow, and it's got the cover. It's got a rock and rollsy song, and the last one on, what is that called again? Show Business. It's like a poorer version of the rocker off of Dirty Deeds, and just they really haven't realized their sound yet on this, and it will slowly start coming into view later. I actually didn't get High Voltage. My first AC/DC was Let There Be Rock. I remember we were on family vacation in Winnipeg, and I picked it up and turned it over and looked at it, and oh, this looks kind of cool. And then it turned out to be really cool. It was really heavy. It turned out to be the first album, actually the second album in history that we bought as kids that had no mellow songs on it. There was Rainbow Rising, and then there was Let There Be Rock. So, but the first album, you know, got that next, and it's, you know, even our debut is, you could tell that huge difference in the heaviness and the high octane distorted guitars between our High Voltage and the Let There Be Rock. So there you go, AC/DC.
Yeah, it's got a certain charm to it, but yeah, there's it's lacking some balls, I think, right?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
so definitely. All right, we're gonna go to 1968 for the debut from Jethro Tull. This was, you know, as someone who has followed this band for a long time, and I'm a pretty big fan of this band. Again, another album I don't dislike, but it's just like, you know, at this point in time, you know, these guys were touting themselves, and they were labeled as basically a blues band, so British blues band. So, you know, they would play alongside, you know, Chicken Shack and Fleetwood Mac and Savoy Brown, although they were kind of lumped in with all those bands. And that was their style. So, you know, the kind of rich sound that this band would develop with subsequent albums that included, lots of flute and acoustic guitars and Hammond organ and keyboards and going folky and proggy and hard rock and mixing all that stuff. This is basically more of a stripped down kind of a blues band here. So you've got, Mick Abrams on guitar, this would be the only album he recorded with the band. He was basically a blues guitar player. He would be replaced by Martin Barre for the second album. You've got Ian basically singing, playing a little bit of guitar, playing a little bit of flute. I don't think his personality had started coming through yet. You got Clive Bunker on drums here as well. There's a lot of instrumentals on here, which are more just kind of examples of what you would hear from a lot of bands on the scene at the time. You get a drum solo in one of them, you get a flute solo in another, you get a guitar solo in another. But I mean, there's some good songs on here. You got My Sunday Feeling, which is pretty killer blues rock song. You got Beggar's Farm, which is more in that slow blues vein. Lots of really good guitar textures. Dharma for One, for me, kind of hints at what's to come from this band. And again, here it gives you get a Clive Bunker guitar solo, but I think the arrangements, the complexity of that song kind of hinted where they would go with Stand Up at Benefit and certainly Aqualung a couple years later. You got Cat Squirrel on here. Song for Jeffrey is probably the most famous song on this album. And it's kind of real rootsy blues again, but I think that song would kind of follow this band around throughout the rest of their career as a fan favorite. And I also don't think that Anderson's vocals have fully developed on this album. I mean, he's kind of got this kind of like, nasally type of thing going on that sounds a lot of reverb on the vocals. And I think his kind of whimsical nature of delivering lyrics hadn't developed yet by this point. I don't think Ian Anderson is the character that he would become was fully realized. I mean, Ian became the driving force in this band very, very quickly after this album. And this just sounds like a bunch of English guys in a blues band, right? Whereas some subsequent albums, you've got this musical genius, Ian Anderson at the helm, kind of driving everything that's going on. And that's not quite the feel you get from this album, but some good stuff on here. But definitely considering Stand Up, that would come just a year later, and Benefit shortly after that, and then of course Aqualung, Thick as a Brick. I mean, all this greatness to follow. I mean, this is like kind of like that the baby steps, so to speak, right? Really early on, but interesting enough. One of those albums from their catalog that I don't listen to too often. Every now and then you put it on. I listened to it a couple days ago, and I was like, yeah, it's got some moments, but for me, it just doesn't quite stack up to what came afterwards.
Yeah, it's funny. It's almost like if Black Sabbath had an album out in 1969, it would be like that, because Sabbath in the Earth days was more of a British blues boom band.
Absolutely.
And instantly they pretty much shed the blues by the first album. I mean, that is the only one, arguably, I think, that has any blues on it at all. But it's like Jethro Tull, and it's odd. I mean, they're really the only two bands. Of course, there's that little Tony Iommi played with them briefly, right? But they're the only two bands that kind of went from the blues boom into something different. One to prog, one to metal. Zeppelin kind of went from British blues boom into fairly adventurous, but we don't know what to call them, right? And then there's a band like Status Quo that went from psych into British blues boom, so it's but of all our favorite prog bands that we love, this is the only one that's an example like that, right?
Yeah, because you listen to like the first album, we're going to get to another one a little bit, but like you listen to that first Yes album or the first Pink Floyd album, right? I mean, very different, but they're not coming from a blues aspect.
No. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, so my number 3 is this band Motorhead with their debut. I remember getting this, right when it came out, and it was so badly recorded on purpose and gruff and weird, and there's a reason for that. Out of my first 3 so far, I would have given the Aerosmith maybe a 6 out of 10. I would have given the AC/DC 6.5 out of 10. I like it. It just doesn't sound like AC/DC. This one, I would probably give this a 7 out of 10. So this is one where I'm really not disliking it. Maybe I could have flipped the order, but so essentially what they did is they got sent in by Ted Carroll from Chiswick, right? I got heck for that once, calling it Chiswick, right? Chiswick. So to record a single, and they're all hopped up on speed, and they're recording with a guy named Speedy King. they go in to do a single. They're sent in to do a single, and they just decide, oh, let's make a whole album. So they made a whole album. Fast Eddie is just getting into the band, and then Ted Carroll was kind of so impressed that they went and did this. He kind of paid to finish it off and say, okay, well, let's make it an album, right? So it was a really rushed affair, done really quickly. Like I say, Fast Eddie's just coming into the band. It's got a cover on it. Train Kept a Rolling. There's a tie with our Get the Wings earlier on, right? But these songs, Fast Eddie doesn't do a lot of writing on here. Like I say, the recording is is really quite rough. It's a little dated and bluesy with the Watcher. Keep Us on the Road isn't so hot. It's almost like slowed down Motorhead a little bit, right? And I remember we did not like the song Motorhead or Vibrator because we thought both of those were too melodic for us as kids, right? Lost Johnny, Iron Horse, pretty good. Yeah, White Line Fever was a little kind of punky and it just sounded a little happy sort of thing. Yeah, I just thought that they made a great leap forward as per the theme of this show to this. And I remember seeing this in the, I think I've said this before, but I remember seeing this in Strawberry Jams at Spokane, and I leapt up and almost banged my head on one of these big wooden beams because in this low ceiling thing. But basically Motorhead went from black and white to color fast with the music and everything. So Fast Eddie is, well ensconced at this point in the band. All originals, super heavy, really, really heavy album, much heavier than the debut. Not really much heavier. The debut is so dirty and gnarly and distorted that everything sounds heavy on it, right? But just a massive leap forward. So essentially Overkill, Ace of Bomber, then Ace of Spades are the same album. They all sound great. They're all classics, but the first one is just a little spotty in places. There you go. Motorhead number 3.
Yeah, and you have to wonder how much of that material that wound up on that album are things that Lemmy was kicking around in Hawkwind, right? That they didn't deem,
Well, and Motorhead was a band since 75 too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So my next one is from 1971. It's amazing to think that this album goes back this far, but it actually does. Thin Lizzy, self-titled. Cool. So, this is like a weird album. If like you, because I think when I first started getting into Thin Lizzy, I had exposure to all of the, Gorham and Robertson years and forward before I even went back to listen to the original first couple albums. And when you listen to this debut after your, Bad Reputation and Jailbreak and all those familiar albums that we all know and love, and then you hear this, you're like, whoa, what is this? Right? Because pretty much, this is a trio. So here you got Phil Lynott, Brian Downey, and Eric Bell on guitar. So it's kind of like this power trio type of thing. But there's like a really weird mix of styles on here. You think in those kind of great melodic, heavy rock songs with, the twin guitars and very polished sounding. And here you get like a mix of like Irish folk and some kind of big lumbering, almost Cream style, hard rock, bluesy jams, and so to speak, right? But there's like a little bit of a charm to this album. Phil's, I think, vocal style not fully realized yet on some of these tracks. He's kind of like doing this kind of like talking through the lyrics, so to speak. Still sounds like Phil, but you just get that impression that this band is, they're all really young. Not quite sure which direction they wanted to go. Are we a folk band? Are we a hard rock band? Right. But there's a mixture of both on here. You've got Diddy Levine. It's got some pretty heavy riffs. I think that Eric Bell, pretty interesting guitar player. I mean, obviously he was a fan of Hendrix, I think, because he throws in a lot of really cool, like Hendrixy wah-wah solos and stuff here and there, kind of like psychedelic, what have you. Ray Gun is a pretty cool song, kind of heavy. What else? Return of the Farmer's Son, pretty interesting. You get Look What the Wind Blew In, which I think is pretty catchy and I think kind of hints at what's to come from Phil as far as being able to write a good hook. What else here? Remembering is also another really good track, I think, and it's listed as part 1, but that also has some Thin Lizzy-isms that we would associate with this band going on. But overall, I think for me, this album lacks some of the sophistication that we would see from this band, fairly shortly after. But I think there's a level of kind of ferocity that's kind of bubbling under the surface. It's like this band that's like, are we a folk band? Are we a hard rock band? Let's try and combine the two on here. And I think, Phil the Poet is in his infancy on this album. But, they would, with Shades of Blue Orphanage, which would come out shortly thereafter, we would see a bit of a jump there. And then, of course, you got Vagabonds of the Western World, which I think is the best of the first three albums. And then all of a sudden you've got Nightlife and Fighting and all that kind of stuff. So Baby Thin Lizzy, not necessarily bad Thin Lizzy. It's just really different. And I think if you kind of, get out of your mind Jailbreak and all those great albums and songs that we know with the classic Thin Lizzy sound, there's this sort of a charm to this, which I can totally get into. So that's my number 3.
Yeah, I always look at those first two as a bit of a pair, and you're right, they're quite folky. And with a little bit of the other big band in Ireland at the time was Skid Row, right? Rush Shields. So they were like a frantic, heavier version of they were like Cream, but actually with a bit of a like I say, frantic and proggy at the same time. Cool band. And Phil was in that band briefly, but yeah, those two are the quietest ones, and then Vagabonds it picks up a little bit, and then you get into the new thing as well. So yeah, they are charming, and it is Phil the Poet, and he's very Irish, and it's a neat combination of a little bit hinting at the recent history of rock and roll mixed with folk, I'd say on that. So yeah, all right. So my number 2. We're now into the realm of the truly terrible albums for me. So I am going with these. This is probably the very best example of this whole concept that I could think of. This is the first one I thought of right away. Is The Sweet with Funny. So this is a German copy, which is Funny How Sweet Cocoa Can Be. The English copy is called Funny How Sweet Cocoa Can Be. But I just finished a Sweet book, and it's getting laid out right now. So the idea with this is a band that is very bubblegummy. They're based on singles. The singles are written by Chin and Chapman. They don't even play on the singles. They sing a bit on the singles, and that's about it. They're very light and poppy. They aren't very heavy, and they're all gathered on this album. So this is their first album. It is produced by Phil Wainman. Oh, I see his name is spelt wrong on the back. 1971. Every single song on this record is sounds like the Archies or other, bubblegummy type things, psychedelic, soft psychedelic, polite psychedelic, with 2 horrible covers and songs I hate: Reflections, Holland Dozier Holland, and Daydream, John Sebastian. Hate those songs. And Funny, Tom Tom Turnaround, Coco, Chop Chop. But the neat thing about the German copy of this album is that it has Done Me Wrong All Right on it, which is the last song on the album. 12 songs on this debut, written by the band, and it's super heavy. It sounds like Black Sabbath's cover of The Crow's Evil Woman. It basically sounds like that song. So it's like they're pointing towards a future here. And that song is not on the English copy. So the English version of this album, which has, as Steve calls them, boiled sweets, like little hard candies, it has a picture of the band inside these little candies. So it's a different cover. But they go from that to, I don't have a copy here, but the actual, so the second album by Sweet, the actual English second album, is Sweet Fanny Adams, which is a heavy metal classic. Yeah. It's gorgeously played, produced, performed. The songwriting is amazing, and the Sweet Fanny Adams album formed the trunk of what we got in North America as a debut, which was Desolation Boulevard. And just to confuse you, Sweet's third album is called Desolation Boulevard, but it's a little more obscure and weird version of itself, I suppose. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is 3/4 of our Desolation Boulevard is actually Sweet Fanny Adams, right? So huge leap forward. You know, they're writing most of their songs, and even when Chin and Chapman is writing their songs, they're now really good, heavy songs on Sweet Fanny Adams. So they're like a completely different band. You know, if I could say one good thing about this debut is it's recorded really well. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the tones on it. It's arranged really well. There's just it's well put together and well performed. It's just like they aren't doing a lot of the performing on it, and it literally is like there are literally songs in the early Sweet canon where they were influenced by the Archie Sugar Sugar and stuff like that, right? And like I say, Chin Chapman essentially writes everything. Actually, they do write a song on here called Spotlight and Genie, but they're both mellow as well. So huge leap in the Sweet moving forward. And just one last thing to mention about the Sweet. In North America, essentially this was our debut. So this came out in '73. This is a compilation still of a lot of their singles and stuff, but it came out on Bell Records, but it's actually really heavy too. Like this is a good heavy hard rocking album, but you know, for all intents and purposes, given that came out on Bell and this came out on Capitol, and this was a big album. This is the only gold album Sweet ever had. Ballroom Blitz, Fox on the Run, right? You know, Sweet FA, super heavy on here. No, You Don't, super heavy. Set Me Free, covered by a lot of metal bands. So a lot of people kind of look at this as the North American debut anyways, but it actually was this. And one last trivia note about this cover, you know, the name of the band is Sweet, The Sweet, right? It's made to look like the Hershey's chocolate
Yes.
colors, right? So there you go. That's my number two. A great example of a horrible debut going to almost like what a lot of people would consider the Sweet's best album ever.
Yeah. And I think, aren't we pretty lucky that the real Sweet came out to play?
Yeah, absolutely.
That first album is, I mean, there's a weird kind of charm about a couple of those songs from a pop perspective, but that was not the band. And we saw the real band shortly thereafter.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So my next choice for number two, from 1969, well, we're really taking care of the 60s and the early 70s here on this show, is Pretty's for You by Alice Cooper. Okay. There's what they were looking at right there. So this, of course, is their debut album on Straight Records, which is the label put together by Frank Zappa and Herb Cohen, which, you know, basically was Frank wanting to promote some cool young bands that he had come in contact with who kind of fit that kind of psychedelic rock tag, right? And this is pretty much a psychedelic album. The band had not yet, you know, adopted that kind of hard rock, that gothic hard rock sound that they were pretty much famous for shortly thereafter. I mean, there's glimpses of it on this album, but for me, I mean, I almost never listen to this album. This is a really weird record, and it's just, it's got, you know, some longer tunes mixed with a lot of really short kind of psychedelic poppy tunes, right? You've got Swing Low, Sweet Cheerio, which I think that's a pretty fun song. That's kind of rocking in spots. What else? Fields of Regret. You get Reflected on here, which is basically the precursor to Elected, which would of course show up on one of the later albums. Lots of experimentation, a lot of weird sound effects going on. I mean, it's, you know, the fact that they're on Zappa's label, it's not surprising this album sounds like this, because of course the Mothers of Invention at the same time was also putting out really weird psychedelic music, right? But, you know, there's a complexity to some of this music. I think, you know, they would move into more of like that hard rock, garage rock type of sound, which really worked for them. I think this just shows a young band that's willing to take a lot of chances. I just don't find a lot of this album very listenable. There's, like I said, there's a couple decent songs on here, but for me, you know, Easy Action, which came a year later, and then especially Love It to Death, which came out in '71, and Killer also came out in the same year. This band got really good, found their sound really quickly after this. And this is, for me, kind of the oddity in their catalog is like, all right, you have this and you have everything else. And so this is my number two on this list. And I just think they got so much better after this. Again, a lot of people really dig this album, find it charming in a weird way. I can see that. But when I'm thinking of the Alice Cooper group, I don't think of this album. And I think that they, with Easy Action and certainly with Love It to Death, they just improved leaps and bounds and really found their sound really, really quickly.
Yeah.
There you have it.
Yeah, I think that one and Pretty's for You kind of go as a pair. And in talking to Alice and the guys, I mean, essentially they see such a demarcation point when you do get to Love It to Death, because they say that Bob Ezrin reined them in and got them to write songs, and and just settle down, and he would tear apart the songs and move parts around, and he helped them come up with those great hits like I'm 18 and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point, because there's not a cohesive songwriting on this album, I don't think.
Yeah.
It's like, there were plenty of psychedelic bands at the time who were just making these kind of weird hippy drippy songs that, okay, we're experimenting and we're going to throw some odd time signatures and some weird sound effects and, weird vocal effects, and it'll be fun. But in the long run, is that really enjoyable for the listener, right? Does that make you come? I mean, all those classic Alice Cooper group albums, that we just mentioned, and then some, they have great songs that make you want to come back and revisit over and over and over again. You listen to this, and there are parts of this album where I'm kind of like, skip, right? Skip. And it's just like, where is this going? It's really going nowhere, right? So again, I know, I remember, a year ago, I did a ranking the album show of Alice Cooper, right? And then this was, I think, either at the bottom of my list or fairly close to the bottom. And I had one guy who says this is the greatest psychedelic album of all time and easily the best Alice Cooper record there ever was. And, you're nuts. And I'm like, okay, I mean, that's cool if you think that. But to me, it doesn't work. And it just, like I said, they're still trying to figure it out here. And, hooking up with Ezrin. I mean, if you're going to hook up with a producer that's going to kind of steer you in the right direction, he's the guy to do it.
Yeah. I think I said Pretty's for You when I meant Easy Action. So those two are the pair. That one and the red one with that great live, or that shot of the band with the long hair and stuff.
Oh yeah,
it looks so cool. And that album looks like it's supposed to be so heavy and so awesome, and yet it's kind of like that one, right? So once they start moving away, Herb Cohen and Alice themselves with Warner's, they were fighting with each other. I mean, Zappa and Herb were fighting with each other. They were fighting with Warner, Straight and Warner, big drama going on there. And Alice slowly moves away too. So as soon as you get to Love It to Death, a third album, at that point, you see them becoming more of a Warner ethic band, way more so than a Straight Records band or a Zappa, Beefheart, Mothers of Invention, Fugs, whatever band, right?
Yeah, we're no longer this oddity band anymore,
yeah.
right? We want to be kind of taken seriously. Yeah. Because it's almost like Zappa's label was like, here's my collection of oddities, right? Here's these weird bands that you would probably never listen to, because you know who I am. Check these guys out, and then you listen to. I mean, I don't. Most of the stuff I've heard that was on that label is like, all right, that's pretty freaking weird, right?
Yeah. And same lineup too, which is funny because these guys all, they all migrated over to LA from Phoenix, right? Together more or less. And same guys all the way through the whole Alice Cooper band, right up until, the last one, Muscle of Love, right? But yeah, just they just had a complete rethink, right? And then part of that is that, I just remember from all the interviews, it's like being at that band house now up in Detroit, now up in rural Michigan, right? I think it's Ann Arbor or whatever. Like, I'm all mixed in with the Stooges, MC5, and Ted Nugent and the Amboy Dukes, and they're all partying and stuff. But so they're putting Love It to Death together at this crazy farm band house in the middle of nowhere, and that's where they have this huge rethink because of Bob Ezrin, right?
Yeah, and man, did everything click, right? Because Love It to Death is pretty spectacular.
Yeah, cool. All right, so my last one is my second one in the realm of terrible. It's UFO with their first album. I have these compilations. I've got it here twice, but I don't have my vinyl anymore of this. There you go. There's what the actual album cover looked like. who knows what they were after on this. This is and granted, I'm breaking the rule a little bit because the second album is just as bad and it's the same thing. It's the Mick Bolton era of UFO. They do UFO, and then they do UFO 2 Flying, where I guess they think we're some sort of a space rock band, and then they do this live album for God knows what reason. And then Michael Schenker comes into the band, and they do Phenomenon, and they're off to the races, Rock Bottom and all that. Oh my. But in the beginning, I was thinking, off the top of my head, I always say this album sounds like demos. It doesn't even sound like demos. It sounds like a garage or basement jam. And then worse, it sounds like a garage and basement jam before anybody wrote any songs. The bass is distorted. The drums are distorted. It's boring as all get out. It's like the most rudimentary. If you take the worst things Free ever did, the most boring things Free ever did, because I'm not a big Free fan, and I think a lot of what they did is boring, but you go right to the very worst Free songs and then go another 5 miles that way, you get to these UFO songs like well, okay, so they cover Come Away Melinda, they cover Come On Everybody. Again, that should be above the door too. No more Come On Everybody, right? Boogie for George, a boring boogie. Again, distorted drums, a shuffle, unidentified flying object, mellow, boring music. I mean, half the time Mick Bolton doesn't even have his distortion pedal on. He's just strumming away some sort of some electric guitar with a bad tone on it, right? So the album has horrible sounds. There's nothing going on that would excite anybody. And it even gets worse for the second album, because there's that big long song of nothing happening, right? Follow You Home is like garage rock, 1965 garage rock, I suppose. Who Do You Love cover, again, put it above the door. Never need to hear anybody cover Who Do You Love ever again. Evil on here, they actually wrote that. It's kind of like it sounds like hidden somewhere in the ineptitude is a little bit of a doomy, dark kind of cool song, but UFO is not that kind of band. So yeah, I mean, other than Mick Bolton, who, he's unfortunately defined by this era, it is Phil and it's Andy and Pete. It's three of the classic guys that go on for years and years and years as part of UFO, but they have this massive rethink when they get Michael in the band. And the other rethink is they actually get a proper label deal. They're no longer Beacon / Nova. Yeah. This Nova situation, this connection with Nova in Germany, it's almost like there's some sort of they're trying to be some sort of cavemanish krautrock version of a British blues boom band, but they got just no talent anywhere, just nothing going on, no songwriting, no performance, no production, just horrible albums. I think these first two UFOs, and then, like I say, they double down and do a live album of it, right? It's like, what are you guys doing, right? So but then again, they changed really fast, they got great really fast, and we all love UFO as soon as Michael gets into the band. So there you go, there's my number one.
Yeah, I think at the time, the band and the label especially were kind of touting them as this great up and coming blues rock / space rock band. And quite frankly, they don't succeed on either of those points on either of those two albums.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just aimless, meandering, not very exciting music. Every now and then, just out of curiosity's sake, I'll throw on this first album or the second one just to try and find that little spark, because you do talk to people every now and then who absolutely love these albums, and I'm like, yeah, I agree with my first, second, third, fourth, and fifth interpretations of these albums that I've gotten over the last 40 years. These are just not very good. They're more of I have in my collection because it's UFO and it's kind of like a weird oddity in their catalog, both of them, but they're just not very good. They're not very good. I mean, Phil doesn't even sound good on them. It's just so ordinary. It's just absolutely ridiculous. But and you have to wonder, touring with the Scorpions when they discovered Michael is when they saw what the Scorpions were doing at that time, and they were like, oh, maybe we should kind of move in, a different realm, so to speak, based on what we're doing. And it's just amazing how things with Phenomenon really clicked in that short amount of time. You get this new young German guitar player in the band, and boom, we found our sound.
Yeah.
So
very cool. Yeah.
Sometimes that's what it takes. So. All right, so my number one, kind of like Martin, I really don't like this album much at all. It's the first album from Genesis from 1969, from Genesis to Revelation. Honestly, I don't even know what the original album cover of this ever was, because I've seen.
Yeah, I've got one. It's I think it's the black with the scary looking religious writing on it, right?
It could be, yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen so many different covers of this
Gold.
album over the years. It's crazy. I don't even know where I got this. This is some cheap, cheesy reissue or whatever. But originally, discovered by Jonathan King, signed to Decca Records. I mean, being on Decca Records was a big deal at the time. But this was a really young band. They're basically still in school, right, or just out of school. Just trying to learn their instruments. This is most of this album is really folky. It's kind of, it reminds me of like early Bee Gees. It's kind of like this folky pop, psychedelic music. Like I call it psychedelic pop, right? A lot of acoustic and 12-string guitars. Very little of all those kind of cool keyboards we would hear, going forward from the band. So basically, you've got Tony Banks mostly on piano. Not a lot of really interesting guitar work. Not a lot of really interesting Peter Gabriel vocals. I mean, when the sour turns to sweet is probably the lone song on here that I actually really like. The Serpent, kind of somewhat mysterious sounding, I guess. What else? Honestly, there's really nothing else that I really enjoy from this album. Mostly shorter songs in 2.5 to 4 minute long range, but quite frankly, even the songs that are 4 minutes long, which at the time, at 1969, that's considered a long song, right? Too long. All right. It's just that I think most of these songs, and there was a lot of them, was there 13 songs on this original album? It overstays its welcome really quickly. And it's just amazing that one short year later, they would switch record labels. They would go over to Charisma. They would release Trespass. And then all of a sudden, there's the Hammond organ, right? There's the electric piano, little bits of Mellotron, right? All of a sudden, all those different bass textures, the 12-string guitars, the electric guitars, the really kind of neat vocals from Peter Gabriel, right? And I think Trespass was the springboard to Nursery Crime, which most people consider the beginning of that classic Genesis period. But this is just this kind of, I have a hard time even calling this Genesis, kind of like the UFO thing. It's like, it's so completely different from what came after. It just sounds like a bunch of school kids just making a pop album, with lots of acoustic guitars and a little bit of piano. And, there's no prog rock on this whatsoever in my view. So, got lots of strings. All right. In place of, I guess, where all the keyboards will come later on. Maybe that's where they got their inspiration, but which Arthur Greenslade is the guy who did all the string arrangements. But I don't know. Again, there's people who really like the kind of naivety of this album. I just find this album pretty boring and uninteresting. And it's one that I love Genesis, love them. Probably my favorite prog band of all time, but I almost never have a need to go back to this album.
Yeah, it's funny. They're one of the few that doesn't even start Psych. They don't even give you that to hang your hat on, right? Like Pink Floyd, great Psych to start with. Yes, you could say kind of started Psych. Deep Purple certainly started Psych, right? Even Status Quo started Psych. Golden Earring, a little bit. I mean, that goes almost back to Garage, right? With those guys. But that was definitely a weird one, and a perfect example, right? Of just changing. Right, just advancing so fast into what we love, right? So
and cool. You have to wonder too, how was the influence of Jonathan King so great that he steered them in that direction? Because as soon as they break away from Decca and him, boom, complete change in sound. So a lot of times you have to wonder, it goes back to the Alice Cooper thing, working with Zappa, and maybe it had something to do with UFO as well. You get these bands who, early on get discovered, and obviously they don't know what they're doing. They have no experience in the industry, and they're kind of influenced by a label or a producer to do a certain sound, which is actually not what they really want to do. And then once they break away, all of a sudden their own characteristics start to come up to the forefront.
Yeah. Boy, so much happened in 1972, right? 1970 is that year, that fulcrum point where metal gets invented, prog gets invented, right? And all of this, it's the death of Psych and just moving into this new thing. And in some ways, not so much the death of the British blues boom, because that lingers on, right? Because the blues just lingers, right? You know, and Mountain, Cactus, all that stuff, right? Kiss, even in some respects, and Boy Dukes in some respects, right? Which blues and psych, I suppose, combined. But yeah, it's funny. It's, you know, the parallels between prog and metal being invented, boom, 1970, are just so much there, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned the British blues bands. I mean, look at all the ones who were pretty active and pretty notable at the time. So like Fleetwood Mac and Chicken Shack and Savoy Brown and Jethro Tull, and 10 years after, and we can go on and on and on. If you look at a lot of the albums from those bands, starting with 1970 and 71 and going forward for the next couple of years, a lot of experimentation going on there, and they're breaking away from those standard 12-bar blues songs and adding elements of different styles of music, hard rock and what we would then call progressive rock, and bits of jazz and things like that. So it's almost like everybody was wanting to try something a little bit different as soon as the 70s kicked in, and that, quite frankly, I think is what's so great about that decade. It's like bands wanting to take chances and move outside of their comfort zone to try something a little bit different.
Yeah, cool. Right on. Yeah. Wow, this was fun.
Yeah, this was really good. So let us know what you think of not only our selections, but this kind of topic, because we might be able to get some additional legs out of this, I think, because we had a bunch that we didn't choose for today that we could go back and do. So we'll see. So let us know. And Martin, you got any stuff you want to promote here? Any new books come in? Or
not particularly, just martinpopoff.com for the books. I've got my podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, available in 40 podcast places. We've got our YouTube show, The Contrarians. That's about it.
Cool.
Going on.
That was good. Yeah. All right. So everybody visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Of course, we're here for you all the damn time on YouTube. We'll be seeing Martin coming up again real soon. Martin and I are going to start devising some other show themes and topics for you guys. So we'll touch base real quick with all that news on that, and have a good weekend, everybody. What is coming up this weekend? Let me see. Rich Catino is coming on the show on Sunday. We are going to rank the short but sweet catalog of Sanctuary. We got the Hudson Valley Squares coming up on Monday. Sydney Taylor and I will be next week ranking the studio albums of Bad Company, as well as giving our top 10 songs of Mr. Big. Lynn Versace and I are going to be doing a fun show talking about heavy songs from non-heavy bands. That's coming up as well. And we got some Monsters Den things in the works and all sorts of other fun stuff that I can't even remember right now. So stay tuned for all that. For Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Have a good weekend, everybody.